Annually, without breaking his routine, Salvador Dalí would pack his latest works, leave his native Catalonia, and head to France to the nearest train station in Perpignan. From there, he traveled to the capital, while Gala arranged for the paintings to be delivered by train after them. It might seem like an ordinary station. Dalí had seen dozens like it throughout his life. Yet it was not Paris, nor even New York, that evoked the strongest emotions in him, but Perpignan, which he boldly declared the center of the earth, even creating a corresponding painting. The otherwise unremarkable station might have remained famous only for being immortalized by the great artist, had it not been for the dark story of dark-haired women disappearing from the station one by one. The investigation spanned over 20 years, raising countless questions and theories. To many, it seemed obvious that Dalí's paintings had a disturbing influence on the psychology of the killer or killers. His works depicted grotesque female forms, beheaded with severed arms and legs or disemboweled. Inspired by these immortal creations, some deranged maniac, a mad surgeon, seemingly decided to bring them to life in flesh and blood. On the evening of Sunday, September 24th, 1995, Tatiana and Dujar's parents anxiously awaited their daughter at home. She had spent the day at a friend's house and promised to be back in time for dinner, but Tatiana never arrived. Overcome with worry, her parents waited until morning before rushing to the police. They explained to the officers that their daughter, 17 years old, was going through a rebellious phase. Tatiana had been skipping classes in favor of parties and even got a tattoo of a devil on her hip. Naturally, the police immediately assumed she had run away, stating this plainly to her distraught parents. The harsh truth is that, in cases of disappearance, it's better to be a model teenager. Otherwise, authorities are less likely to take the situation seriously. To make matters worse, Tatiana hadn't been at her friend's house at all. Instead, she had hitchhiked to a party in Toulouse. On Sunday evening, she boarded the Toulouse-Perpignan train to head home. Witnesses later confirmed seeing her when she got off the train at Perpignan station. Someone even recalled her making a phone call. That was the last time anyone saw her. Because of her rebellious behavior, the search for Tatiana was lackluster at best. Police remained convinced she had run away and, 2 years later, closed the case. Her father, however, refused to give up. He investigated every lead, whether it was rumors of his daughter being seen at a Romani camp or in a Spanish bar, allegedly working as a night hostess. Tatiana's parents were furious with the police. If not for other victims, her disappearance might have been forgotten entirely. A tragic reality that reflects the flawed response to her case. Just 3 months later, a gruesome discovery was made in Perpignan. The naked body of a young woman was found face down in a vacant lot right in the city center. A local resident noticed her from his window one morning. Her body was almost completely drained of blood. The victim had suffered numerous stab wounds to the chest, and the killer had severed her breasts and removed all of her intimate organs, including the anal area. Yet when the body was turned over, her face was entirely untouched. On the victim, they found rings. Nearby, there was an earring, a scarf, and a sanitary tampon lying in a pool of blood. However, no clothes, purse, or identification were discovered. Despite this, the victim was identified on the spot as 19-year-old Mokhtaria Chib. The deputy prosecutor remembered her. He had helped place her in a shelter a year earlier due to her troubled relationship with her father. Mokhtaria's father had wanted her to follow the traditional values of their family, but she saw herself as fully French and had run away from home. The forensic examiner who performed her autopsy was stunned by the severity of the injuries. He concluded that the barbaric removal of her organs had been performed post-mortem. Police consulted several pathologists, all of whom unanimously agreed that the killer had used a scalpel and must have taken at least an hour to carry out such an operation. The experts believed the work bore the marks of an experienced surgeon, veterinarian, or at the very least, a butcher. Some even suggested that the killer couldn't have acted alone and must have suspended the body in a well-lit area to perform the mutilation. The police retraced Mokhtaria's steps from December 20th, 1997. That night, she had left her friend's house, declining an invitation to stay over, and decided to walk home. The route typically took 40 minutes and passed through Perpignan's train station. If she hadn't hitched a ride with the killer, someone should have seen her, yet there were no witnesses. However, a critical piece of evidence surfaced unexpectedly. A month after Mokhtaria's body was found, a man living near the train station came to the police with a discovery. He had found a size 40 shoe in the bushes of his garden. This led the police to search the neighboring properties, where they found the second shoe. Both belonged to Mokhtaria. The police concluded that the killer hadn't driven away after the crime, but had walked on foot, possibly to his home nearby. This led investigators to search for a deranged surgeon or doctor living near the station, and they found one. The suspect's name was Andrés Palomino Barrios. Originally from Peru, he had moved to France. Suspicion fell on him because he worked at a hospital in Perpignan, had a criminal record, and lived just 200 meters from the vacant lot where the victim's body was discovered. He also resided near the location where her shoes were found. Dr. Barrios had worked at 18 different hospitals across France, being dismissed each time for incompetence and laziness. Some employers even suspected that his medical diploma from Peru was a forgery. Meanwhile, the police were already familiar with him as a thief and fraudster. He had been caught stealing medical equipment. In short, Barrios had a history of breaking the law and lived in close proximity to the crime scene. A month after Moctaria's body was found, he was arrested. When police searched his home, they found a horrifying level of disorder. Barrios himself appeared unkempt and hadn't bathed in a long time. Neighbors reported, however, that on December 21st, the day after Moctaria's murder, Barrios had thoroughly washed his car. The search of his home and vehicle yielded conflicting results. Blood was discovered in the bathtub, living room, toilet, and even inside his car. However, the blood turned out to be his own, as well as chicken blood. Despite this, Barrios was charged with Moctaria's murder. There was no confession and no conclusive evidence tying him to the crime. Nevertheless, police convinced the judge to bring charges against Andrés Palomino Barrios. In June 1998, 22-year-old Marie-Helene Gonzalez boarded a train to visit her parents in Perpignan. Her parents were at work and unable to meet her, but Marie-Helene reassured her mother not to worry, saying she would hitchhike home. However, she never made it to her parents' house. Concerned, her parents reported her disappearance to the police. Marie-Helene's body was discovered 10 days later by a passerby near a roadside dumping ground. Her body lay atop a pile of trash, partially covered by a rug. The killer had severed her head and both hands. Additionally, her internal organs had been removed. Unlike the precise cuts found on Moctaria Chaib, Marie-Helene's wounds were rough and crude. Her internal organs were found 2 meters away, inside a box. However, her head and hands were never recovered. Identifying her by appearance was impossible, but the police linked the body to Marie-Helene based on her parents' missing persons report. Once again, the forensic pathologist concluded that the crime bore the hallmarks of a professional. This time, however, Dr. Andrés Palomino Barrios couldn't be blamed. He had been in prison the entire time. The investigating judge ordered his release, though the charges against him were not dropped. Authorities believed he might have had an accomplice or a copycat, so he remained under surveillance. Meanwhile, the police resumed their search for another mad doctor. Only after Marie-Helene's murder did they revisit old cases, finally recalling Tatiana and Dujar. Tragically, too much time had passed, and the chances of finding her alive had already slipped away. Panic gripped the city. Young women, particularly brunettes, began avoiding the Perpignan train station despite the constant police patrols. Profilers were brought in to create a behavioral profile of the killer based on the evidence gathered. So what did they conclude? They posited that the murderer was likely an exceptional physician, perhaps a successful surgeon. Additionally, they suggested the killer may have drawn inspiration from the work of Salvador Dalí, who had famously painted one of his most iconic works depicting Perpignan. After all, Dalí's paintings often featured distorted female figures, mutilated and fragmented. Why wouldn't someone take inspiration from the art of a man who had made the city famous? These were the profilers' conclusions, and the outcome of this story will reveal whether their insights were reliable or if their true brilliance shines only in American crime dramas. Soon, the inevitable happened. In February 2001, Perpignan was shaken by another disappearance. Fatima Idrahu, a cashier at a local store, left work at 6:30 p.m. but never made it home. When her sister reported her missing to the police, she brought along a photograph of Fatima. The officers immediately feared the worst upon seeing the image of a young, beautiful brunette, eerily similar to the other victims of the mad surgeon. As with the others, her route home passed through the train station. But this time, something unexpected occurred. The police had a witness. The owner of a nearby shop reported hearing a scream around 7 p.m. Concerned, he went to investigate, thinking someone might need help. He saw a white car parked nearby. Inside the car was a couple arguing. The girl seemed desperate to get out. The witness managed to catch part of the license plate number before the car drove off. There were only 4 vehicles in the region with that partial number, and just one of them was white. The police quickly identified the car's owner. The car belonged to one Marc Delpech, a 34-year-old man. He was the son of a prominent doctor, married with 2 children, and owned a bar in Perpignan. He had no prior run-ins with the law. Before speaking with him, the police examined his phone records and found Fatima's number. The two had occasionally exchanged messages, confirming their connection. It was time to speak to Mark, but Mark wasn't home. He was visiting his wife's parents on the other side of the country. Undeterred, one of the investigators drove 850 kilometers to the in-laws' home and rang the doorbell. Mark's father-in-law answered, and Mark stood behind him. The moment he saw the investigator, Mark panicked, broke into a sweat, and realized he had nowhere to run. Standing in the middle of his in-laws' hallway, Mark confessed to Fatima's murder. He claimed he had fallen in love with her after seeing her in the store where she worked. They supposedly began a relationship, but Mark was married, and Fatima wasn't content with being a mistress. She demanded he leave his wife, yelling and threatening him. Mark described it as a love story gone wrong, a crime of passion. He said he disposed of Fatima's body by throwing it into the waters of Port Ventre Bay, near the Spanish border, claiming the current must have carried it away. However, when divers searched the area, they found nothing, not because of the current, but because Mark had lied. Fatima's naked body was later discovered in a pond near Mark's home. Her body and face bore numerous bruises and signs of a violent beating, but there was no evidence of dismemberment. In Mark's house, investigators found a collection of clippings about the Perpignan train station murders. And something even more chilling. Mark was an aspiring writer and had started a novel. The first chapter was titled Tatiana and consisted of just 15 lines describing the disappearance of Tatiana Andujar. Detectives were convinced they had captured the serial killer behind the Perpignan train station murders, but they couldn't link Mark to the other crimes. He was convicted solely for Fatima's murder. Nonetheless, the families of Tatiana, Marie-Helene, and Mokhtaria attended Mark's trial in June 2004, hoping his guilt might compel him to confess to the other murders. But Mark wasn't the type to cooperate. Interacting with him was like talking to a wall. He gave terse one-word answers, such as yes or no. When asked if he had sexually assaulted Fatima, he replied no. He claimed he killed her because she rejected his advances. Despite the lack of evidence tying him to the other murders, most people believed Mark was the serial killer. Perhaps that belief influenced the court's decision to hand him the maximum sentence, 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Mark appealed the verdict, but the sentence was upheld. It's possible Mark was involved in the other crimes. He may have hidden not only Fatima's body in the pond, but also another victim's, perhaps Tatiana's. In 2012, a new investigative judge ordered a thorough re-examination of the genetic evidence collected in the cases of Mokhtaria Chaib and Marie-Helene Gonzalez. Over 30 plastic bags containing samples were analyzed, and the effort paid off. Specialists managed to isolate partial male DNA on Mokhtaria's shoes. In 2014, when the FBI shared a new technique with French authorities that allowed partial DNA to be compared with databases, a match was found. It was nothing short of a miracle. They had a name: Jacques Ronson. 54 years old, had a criminal record with multiple accusations of violent assaults on women. What shocked investigators was that he was far from the brilliant surgeon or renowned doctor they had been hunting for years. Jacques had no higher education, no prestigious career. He survived on odd jobs and, after his release from prison, lived off welfare. The profilers had been entirely wrong, and the police realized they had been chasing a phantom. Jacques was arrested and brought in for questioning. He was interrogated for 30 hours, during which he was taken to the Perpignan train station where the women had been abducted. But Jacques denied everything, maintaining his innocence even when confronted with the evidence of his DNA on Mokhtaria's shoes. The officers were running out of time. By law, they could not hold Jacques much longer without a confession or additional evidence. At 2 a.m., after 39 hours in custody, the officers decided to take a break. Only one female officer remained in the station. She offered Jacques a cigarette and started a casual conversation. She asked him about his life, his children, and his experiences. Something about her empathy and simple human connection reached Jacques in a way the intense interrogations hadn't. For reasons known only to him, Jacques finally broke. He confessed to murdering Mokhtaria. 17 years later, he described in detail the events of Saturday, December 20th, 1997. That winter evening, it was raining. Jacques noticed a beautiful girl in a brown leather jacket walking on the opposite side of the street. He took a folding knife out of his pocket, quickly crossed the road, and, threatening Mokhtaria with the knife, forced her to leave the street and head toward an abandoned lot nearby. He forced the girl to undress and tried to assault her, but she put up a determined resistance. She screamed, threatened to call the police, struggled, jerked away and moved away from him on her elbows. He was unable to get what he wanted, despite his attempts. Finally, he killed her, and using his folding knife, cut out her organs right there, at night, under the light of a full moon. He placed them in a plastic bag. With the bag in one hand and Mokhtaria's shoes in the other, Jacques left the lot. He threw the bag into a drain behind the station and tossed the shoes along the way, meeting no one on the street. Calmly, without haste or panic, he disposed of the evidence and returned to his hotel near the station, where he had been staying at the time. As he stated, Mokhtaria became a random victim. Any beautiful girl with a full bust would have worked for him. When asked why he had cut out the victim's organs, Jacques replied that he wanted to remove traces of his DNA. The police didn't believe this explanation, but they had to accept it. In any case, he confessed to the murder. The next day, the headlines on the front pages of the press read that the killer, who had been terrorizing the Perpignan train station, had been caught, and the girl, who had sworn to remember his face forever, recognized Jacques Ronson. In March 1998, Sabrina left her house and was waiting for her boyfriend, who was supposed to arrive soon. A white car stopped next to her, and a man got out. He seemed to have been drinking, which was confirmed when the man mentioned that he had been celebrating his birthday in St. Charles. He asked if she wanted to continue celebrating with him. Sabrina naturally refused. The man tried to approach her house, but stumbled. Sabrina helped him up and led him to the door when he began to search through his pockets. She thought he was looking for his key ring, but suddenly he pulled out a knife and attacked her. The man struck the first blow under Sabrina's chest, then stabbed her in the stomach, and without withdrawing the knife, he dragged it upward, essentially slashing her open. He did all of this with a terrifying look in his cold ice blue eyes. He seemed to be enjoying what he was doing, and told Sabrina that he would kill her. Sabrina thought she was about to die, but she told herself, "If I survive, I must remember his face." Fortunately, a neighbor heard Sabrina's screams and came out to see what was happening. She saw two figures, one person lying on the floor and the other kneeling beside them. The criminal, startled by the neighbor, ran away, and Sabrina lost consciousness. She spent several days in a coma, and when she woke up, she vowed to remember the face of her attacker. She promised that if she ever encountered him again, she would recognize the man with a round face, dirty hair, bad teeth, and the cold, icy eyes. Imagine her shock when in 2014, she saw a photograph of her attacker on the front page of a newspaper. The girl contacted the police and explained that Jacques Ronson had nearly killed her 16 years ago, on March 9, 1998, right at the entrance to her house. However, the investigating judge was unaware of the attack on her because it happened after the murder of Mokhtaria. Since the police were convinced that Dr. Andres Palomino Barrios was the killer, no one connected Mokhtaria's murder with the attack on Sabrina. Moreover, the cases were handled by different police departments. This was a huge oversight because Jacques could have been stopped many years earlier. He never intended to let his victim live and had even mentioned celebrating his birthday in St. Charles. St. Charles is an industrial zone near Perpignan. If someone had gone to St. Charles and checked who was celebrating their birthday on March 9th, the crimes of Jacques Ronson could have been put to an end back then. Unfortunately, this opportunity was missed, and 3 months later, Marie-Helene Gonzalez disappeared. In June 2015, Jacques was charged with attempting to murder Sabrina. Investigators now set out to determine whether he had killed Marie-Helene Gonzalez as well. But connecting him to her murder was not easy. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, or other traces left at the crime scene. They were incredibly fortunate when, upon hearing the girl's name, Jacques decided to confess. The police conducted a reconstruction of the crime, and the scene left everyone present with chills. Marie-Helene had been hitchhiking and ended up in Jacques' car. Now he was brought to the crime scene, placed in the car alongside a mannequin representing Marie-Helene, and asked to demonstrate what he had done to the victim. The man, acting as if possessed, attacked the mannequin, tearing off its buttons and then its clothes. He behaved aggressively and was visibly agitated, as though reliving the murder in front of the police and the investigating judge. He showed how he had pulled a cable from his pocket and strangled the girl to silence her screams. Then he removed her body from the car and mutilated it under the moonlight in the car's headlights. He put her hands and head into a bag and discarded them along the way. Jacques recalled every detail of the crime, but one particular detail alarmed and even frightened the police and the judge. Jacques spoke hastily about how his hair got caught in the thorns of a tree, and that's why he noticed the feet lying on the path, which made him sure he had also cut off the feet. This was an important detail that he probably wouldn't have fabricated. However, the area where he had killed Marie-Helene hadn't changed in all these years. There had never been any trees with thorns growing there. This meant that Jacques had remembered a detail from another murder, one that was definitely not related to Tatiana, the first girl to disappear from the Perpignan train station. This was because at that time, Jacques Ronson had been serving a prison sentence. However, the police learned of another victim of Jacques' violence. Her name was Najette. He attacked the 18-year-old girl in September 1997, just 4 days after moving to Perpignan. Fortunately, she survived the attack. But here's what's interesting. The police missed another opportunity to capture Jacques back in 1998. A few months after the murder of Marie-Helene, Jacques was arrested and interrogated in connection with an attempted attack. In September 1998, around midnight, a woman was driving home in her car when she noticed a vehicle following her. She became suspicious, and rightfully so. The car overtook her, swerved, and forced her to stop. The driver jumped out of his car and approached her with a knife in hand. Fortunately, she managed to lock the door and called her father, who rushed over and scared off the attacker. He also remembered the car's license plate number. The next day, the police arrested Jacques Ronson. Since detectives were actively investigating the murder of Marie-Helene, they asked Jacques about the incident. However, he claimed he hadn't killed her and had heard about the girl's death from his wife and her friend. The police could have pressured him, but since they were convinced the killer was a distinguished surgeon, no one wasted time on Jacques. Unfortunately, Dr. Andres Palomino Barrios, who had probably forged his diploma and was stealing medical equipment, fit the profile much better than the real killer. Only now has the police begun to investigate the life of the serial killer. Jacques Ronson was born into a poor family, where, in addition to him, there were 13 other children. His parents were illiterate, and their home resembled more of a shack. Jacques' brothers and sisters tried to leave the parental nest as soon as possible, but not Jacques. He lived with his parents in one room until he was 18. Jacques committed his first attack at the age of 16 while still living with his parents. He tried to strangle a girl, but for some reason, the case was never pursued. The roots of his crimes likely trace back to his teenage years. Jacques was poor, unattractive, and unpopular. Girls teased him, laughed at him, and didn't want to be his friends. After his arrest, the adult Jacques Ronson insisted that he only wanted to make love to the girls and never intended to assault them. When they rejected his clumsy advances, it reminded him of his childhood when no one liked him. He believed they were laughing at him, so he killed them to erase the ridicule that was visible only to him on their faces. According to a psychiatrist, he didn't take the victims' organs because of DNA, but as souvenirs. In other words, when the girls rejected him, he took parts of their bodies with him, demonstrating that, in some twisted way, they still belonged to him. However, Jacques had several traditional relationships in his life, which resulted in him having 4 children. His last wife, Lolita, was only 16 when she met the 44-year-old Jacques. For 8 years, he led a normal life. But in 2012, Lolita left him. He didn't want to let her go, threatened her, and stalked her. The police arrested him, took his DNA, and added it to the national database, which ultimately led to his capture. Jacques admitted that if he had not spent those 8 years with Lolita, the number of his victims might have been even higher. The man was tried for the murder of Mokhtari, Marie-Helene, and the attempted murder of Sabrina. During the trial, one emotional moment followed another. The prosecutor showed photos and videos of the victims, young women with their whole lives ahead of them. The pain was palpable, as it became clear what these women and their families had lost due to the selfish desires of the murderer. Marie-Helene's brothers and Mokhtari's brother couldn't contain their emotions and attacked Jacques. Officers had to intervene to pull them away from the defendant. But the most lasting impression came from Sabrina's testimony. She recounted how, when Jacques was stabbing her, she could see sadistic pleasure in his eyes. He clearly relished her pain and wanted to kill her just like the other girls. She was almost dead, and only a miracle saved her. The attack Jacques launched on her could not go without consequences. Sabrina said that, fortunately, she had been able to become a mother, but admitted that while she was pregnant, she was haunted by nightmares about her surgical scar reopening. Every word Sabrina spoke reflected the suffering and pain she had gone through. She couldn't hold back, and, addressing Jacques, wished him to rot in prison. The verdict was not surprising. Life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 2040. In prison, Jacques Ronson is kept in isolation, with no visitors other than his lawyer. He confessed to his lawyer that he would like to take a last glance at Perpignan, but that was unlikely. Thus, all the crimes at the Perpignan station found their perpetrator, except for the disappearance of Tatiana. Perhaps one day we will find out the answer to that question. The police are sure that they don't know all of Jacques Ronçon's victims. Lawyers specializing in unsolved cases agree with them. They have reviewed old cases and searched for patterns that could match the killer's modus operandi. In 1986, in the Somme department in northern France where Jacques lived, Isabelle Ménage was murdered. Before her death, the young woman endured sexual violence. The police exhumed the body and discovered mutilated genitals. Jacques admitted that it was his first murder, but then unexpectedly retracted his confession. However, in June 2019, he was charged with Isabelle's murder, and in 2022, he was found guilty.